What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? In today's episode of the Simulator series, we're going to be scripting the Pet Inventory GUI. Now, as always, if this video does help you guys out or you guys do enjoy it, make sure you smash the like button, also hit the subscribe button, and turn post notifications on if you want to get notified when I upload more Roblox development content. Additionally, I have a Patreon if you'd like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file I make during this episode. There's a link down below in the description, and you guys can go and check that out. With that being said, let's get into it. Hopping directly into Eating Simulator to showcase the features that we're going to be creating today. As we can see that we have a button at the bottom left which says Pets. We've created this button, and we also created this GUI in the last episode as well. Today what we're going to be doing is scripting this button to open and display this GUI, and then we're going to be scripting this entire GUI. So inside of here, this container frame is going to populate with all of the different pets that the player currently owns. This little text label right here will display how many pets the player currently has equipped, and this one will display how many pets the player currently has stored within their inventory. If you click on a pet, it will pop up inside of the little info frame displaying the pet, the rarity, the stats, and an unequip or an equip button depending on if the player has one equipped or not. If you already have the max amount of pets equipped and you try to equip a new one, we will get a little warning text popping up at the top of the screen. Additionally, you can unequip a pet or equip a pet. And then you have the multi-delete button right here as well, which when we click this, it will change the info frame right here to display this frame. And then we can select all the pets that we want to delete. This number will update right here, as well as a check mark on the left of each of the pets. And we can click confirm, and all of those pets will be deleted. So with all that being said, let's hop directly into Studio and start working. So the first thing we're going to do is go inside of the Storage GUI, inside of the pet inventory. And right here, we have a script called button. And we're going to actually use this to script this pets button right there. So inside of the script, we have the buttons GUI, which refers directly to this screen GUI right here. And inside of the screen GUI, we have the button holder, which that is for the right-hand side of the screen, all of those buttons. And the left button holder is obviously for the left-hand side of the screen. So where we create the settings button variable, what we want to do is we want to say button GUI dot left button holder dot pets, and then we can rename settings button to pets button, and then we can just copy this, paste that directly right here. So whenever we click on this button, what we want to do is we want to enable or disable this screen GUI right here, which is the pet inventory. So now we're done with that. We have the button all set up. The next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside the config folder. So inside of here, we're going to insert a new module script, and we'll rename that to pets. And inside of this table right here, we're going to list each of the individual pets, so dog, and we're going to set them to a table with all of the rarities, so common, and we're going to set each of the rarities to the stats that the pet is going to offer. So for instance, if we get a common dog pet, the stats that this is going to offer is going to be 2.5. And if we get an uncommon dog pet, then its stats are going to be 3.5. And if we get a rare dog pet, then the stats are going to be 4.5. Let's make sure that we add commas to each of those, and there we go. Currently, our rarity system only goes up to rare, so that's why we're just making common to rare. Then let's put a comma, and we're going to do this for each of the individual pets. So we have dog, bunny, cat, we have a fox, and now we'll actually start increasing the stats on this one as well. So we'll just increase all those stats by basically 1. And then after fox, we have the turtle and the pig. So for the pig, we'll once again increase all the stats by 1 as well. It really doesn't matter considering this is just test data, but I'm just showing you guys what you can do. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually script giving a player to a pet. So inside of the server script service, inside of utils, we have a rewards module, which basically handles all of the functions of how we reward players. So what we're going to do inside of here is we're going to create a new function, and this is going to be rewards.pet. And this function is going to accept a player, which of course is a player, the name of the pet, so dog, fox, or anything like that, and we're just going to say that's pet, and that's going to be a string. And then finally, we are going to accept rarity as a string as well. Now, the way that we're going to have our pet set up is each of the pets is going to be a folder stored with inside of the player. Now, the folder name is going to be a unique ID, and the reason that we need to have a unique ID for every single pet is because let's say that the player has 100 dogs. All of the dogs need to have a specific unique ID. Otherwise, we would never be able to tell any dog apart. Now, this becomes more important when you have specific systems for individual pets, such as if you had a level system for each individual pet. If every single individual pet had their own level, you would want to have a unique ID attached to that pet so you can easily identify that specific pet and give it back the stats that it originally had. Now, the way that we're going to generate the unique ID is by actually getting a service, and the service that we're going to require is the HTTP service. So we're going to create a variable for that, and then inside of the function, we're going to say local folder, and we're going to create an instance.new folder, and we're actually going to parent that to the player.pet inventory, which we haven't created yet, but we will create soon. Pet inventory is going to be a folder inside of the player, very similar to how we have our leader stats or our other inventory systems as well. And we're going to name the folder HTTP service, and we're going to use a method called generate GUID, which will generate the unique ID for us. And then inside of here, we want to say false because we don't want the unique ID to be wrapped in curly braces, which we can see is the argument right here. So now that we've created and named that folder, the next thing that we want to do is we want to create a a string value for the pet rarity. So we're going to say local pet rarity equals instance.new string value, and we're going to parent this to the folder that we just created. Then we're going to set the pet rarity value to the rarity of the pet, which is passed to us when we call this function. And we also need to name this as well. So we're going to say pet rarity name equals rarity. And then we're going to do this exact same thing for the type of the pet. So we're going to copy this, we'll paste it, and we'll rename this from pet rarity to pet ID. You could also say pet type, but we're going to go with pet ID right here just to keep our system consistent throughout our entire project. So pet ID is going to be a string value. We're going to parent that to the folder that we already created. And now we need to change the rarity.name and the rarity.value. So the name is going to be ID, and the value of this is actually going to be the pet that we once again passed through this function. Now, finally, we're going to create a bool value, which is going to store if the pet is currently equipped or not. So we're going to say local equipped equals instance.new bool value. We're going to parent that to the folder. We're going to set the name of this to equipped, and we're going to set the value of this by default to false, because the pet is of course going to be not equipped by default. So whenever we reward a player a pet, what this is going to do is it's going to create a brand new folder, and it's going to store the folder inside of the player.pet inventory folder. The name of this folder is going to be a unique ID. So it's going to be basically a bunch of random numbers and letters. Then inside of this folder that we just created, there's going to be 2 string values and 1 bool value. One of the string values will be named rarity, and that'll store the rarity of the pet. The other string value will be named ID, and that'll actually store the type of the specific pet. Then we have the bool value, which is going to be named equipped, and by default it's going to be set to false, but whenever we actually equip the pet, it will be set to true. Now we need to actually create the data for the player. So inside of our server script service, we're going to go over to the player data. Inside of here, let's scroll all the way down to right below this for loop and right above our success. We're going to create the pet inventory folder. So we're going to say local pet inventory equals instance.new folder. We're going to parent that to the player. The folder name is going to be pet inventory. So now that we've created that folder, we have to see if the player has any pets, and if they do have any pets, then we have to loop through all those pets and add them directly back to the player's folder. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if return value dot pet inventory, then, so if the player has any pets, what we're going to do is we're going to loop through the return value dot pet inventory, and now in this for loop, the index is actually going to be the UUID, and the value is going to be info. In pairs, return value dot pet inventory do. So now when we loop through here, what we're going to do is we're going to actually do the exact same thing that we did when we reward the pet to the player. We can simply just copy all of the stuff that we do inside of here and paste it directly into here. Now we're not going to actually use the HTTP service to generate a new unique ID. What we're going to do is we're going to set the folder name to the UUID, which comes from right here inside of the loop. Then for the rarity, this is going to be stored within the info table. So we're going to say info.rarity. For the pet ID, we're going to say info.id. And then for the equipped, we're going to say info.equipped. And there we go. Now this whole info table might be really confusing for you. Don't worry, we're about to create this. So you're going to see where the rarity comes from, the ID comes from, and the equipped comes from as well. So now when we want to save the player's data, that's when we're going to create the table. So we're going to say local pet inventory equals a brand new table. Then what we're going to do is we're going to loop through all the pets inside of the player's pet inventory folder. So we're going to say for_pet in iPairs player.pet inventory get children do. And now remember, whenever we reward the player a pet, we are going to create a new folder and put that inside of the pet inventory. So now when we're saving, we're going through that folder, we're getting all the children, which if the player does have any pets, the children would be a folder with the name as the UUID, and then that folder will have the string values and the bool value inside of it as well with all the other information. So what we're going to do is we're going to say pet inventory, and we're going to add a brand new pet to this. So we'll say pet.name, which remember, this is going to be the pet's unique ID because the name of the folder is the UUID, and we're going to set that equal to a brand new table. Inside of this table, we're going to have an ID field, and we're going to set this to the pet.id, which is the string value, so that we get the value of the string value. Then we're going to do this again, but instead of for the ID, we're going to do this for the rarity. So pet.rarity.value, because remember, it's a string value. That's why we have to say .value. Finally, we're going to do this for equipped as well. So pet.equipped.value. And now that we've added all the player's pets to the pet inventory table, what we want to do is we want to save that down here. So we're going to say pet inventory, make sure you capitalize the P, equals the variable that we just created. Okay, so that is perfect. Now what we need to do is we need to actually reward the player the pet. So a couple episodes ago, we created this egg script inside of the server script service, which handles hatching eggs. Inside of our function called hatch is where we determine what pet we're going to give to the player, and now we need to actually reward that pet. So at the top of our script, we need to require the rewards module. And first, we need to get the server script service. So we're going to say server script service, and then we can just copy this eggs config because we already have part of this here. And then we'll say server script service dot utils dot rewards. There we go. And then we're going to set the variable to rewards. So now we have a rewards module. And now inside of the hatch function, right below where we actually choose the pet and create the pet variable, we're going to say rewards dot pet, and we'll pass through the player, the pet dot ID, and the pet dot rarity as well. And now remember, inside of our choose pet function, this pet is actually a table from our pets config. And you might be confused why this pet variable has an ID and rarity, but remember, inside of the choose pet function, we're actually using the eggs config. And if you're confused about this eggs config, we can look inside of here, and inside of the eggs config, we have the egg, then it has a table called pets, and inside of this array, it has tables with ID, rarity, and chance. So that's how we're getting the ID and the rarity. And now we're actually rewarding the pet to the player. And now we can actually test this out if we want to. So let's go ahead and start up our game. So inside of our game, we're going to hatch an egg. And now we can see that we've received a common cat. So let's look under players, under monster. We have the pet inventory folder right here. And now we see we have a folder inside of here, which is named after a unique ID. And inside of here, we have a bool value, which is called equipped. We have a string value, which is called ID. The ID is set to cat, which is the pet that we just got. And the rarity is set to common, and that's the rarity of the cat that we just got as well. So now if we can hatch the egg again, we can see a new folder is created inside of our pet inventory with another unique ID. The equipped is set to false, the ID is set to pig, and the rarity is set to rare. So we are actually now rewarding the player, the pet, which is awesome. So now with all that being done, we can actually start working on and scripting the GUI. So I'm going to go ahead and close all of the scripts that we currently have open, and we'll close some of the folders. And now let's actually go into the pet inventory screen GUI. Let's open up the handler for starters, and we're actually going to delete pretty much everything out of here. So we're just going to clear this all out and basically just make it a normal brand new module script. So just like that. And now we want to make some small adjustments to the GUI. So inside of the frame, inside of the container, inside of that container, inside of this template right here, and inside of this holder, we need to set the visibility of the delete text label to not visible so that we don't always see this. And the same goes with the equipped as well. And then finally, we also want to set the template to not visible as well. Then we can close all of these and we can go directly inside of our manager. Now within our manager, we're going to clear some of these variables out because we're not going to need all of this stuff. So we'll leave the handler for now. We'll keep the remotes. We won't be using the settings, but we will be using the pets config. So from the replicated storage, we're going to get the config.pets. So now we have the pets config. Let's go ahead and rename this from settings to pets config. We're also going to need the pet models as well. So we're going to say local pet models equals replicated storage dot pets. Then since these variables are already created, we can actually keep the screen GUI, the frame, and the container. We can also keep the exit button as well. And the template is good too, but we're going to delete the on and off color. And then we're going to delete the generate settings function and this for loop right here too. So now if that's all properly cleaned up, this is exactly what you should have left inside of your script. All right, so now what we're going to do is we want to create a for loop for generating the player's pets. And how do we know what pets the player has? Well, all the pets are stored inside of the folder named pet inventory inside of the player. So we're going to say for underscore pet in iPairs player dot pet inventory get children do. Now let's create a function called pet instance to table. And now this is going to accept an instance called pet. Inside of this function, we're going to create a new variable called new pet, and we're going to set that to a blank table. And then using this table, we're going to say new pet.uuid equals pet name. And now if you're confused by this, how we're going to actually use this function is we're going to say local pet table equals pet instance to table, and we're going to pass through the pet. And remember, inside of the pet inventory folder, inside of the player, when we loop through here, this pet variable is going to be a folder, and the name of that folder is going to be the unique ID of that pet. So that's why we're creating a brand new table and setting the UUID property of that table to the pet.name, as that is what the UUID is. Then we're going to say new pet.id, which refers to the actual type of the pet, such as dog, frog, pig, or anything like that. And how we're going to get that is by saying pet.id.value, because remember, inside of the actual pets folder, there is a string value called ID, and the value of that is the ID. And then we can duplicate that, and then we're just going to do the same thing for the rarity. So inside of the pet, we have the rarity string value, and we want to get the value of that. And then we're going to say new pet.equipped, and that's also inside of the pet.equipped value. And the final thing that we want to do is we want to return the table that we just created. And now already inside of this for loop, we are setting a brand new variable to the table that we get returned from this function. Then what we want to do is above this function, we're going to create a new function, and the name of this function is going to be generate pet. And this is going to accept the pet, which is going to be a table, and that's actually going to be the exact table that we create in this function right here. So as we're going through this for loop and we get the brand new pet table, we want to call the generate pet function and pass through the pet table that we just created. Now inside of the generate pet function, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable called clone, and we're going to set that to the template, and we're going to clone that. Then we want to make sure that we set the visibility of it to true, and we also need to make sure that we set the parent of this to the container frame. Then let's set the name of this to the pet.uuid. Now let's go look at the template. So we see we have the template right here. We want to change the pet name. We probably want to modify the equipped, and we also want to modify the viewport frame as well. So what we want to do is we want to say clone.holder.petName.text equals clone.id. And we're going to use G sub on this because in case any of your pets have like a space in between there, you're going to want to replace the underscore with an actual space. And we also want to set the equipped text label to either visible or not visible based on if the pet is actually equipped or not. So we're going to say clone.holder.equipped.visible equals, and then we're going to say pet.equipped. Oh, and I meant to say pet.id and then the G sub, not clone ID, because that doesn't make any sense. Now, the reason that we're setting the visibility to pet.equipped is because if the pet is equipped, this will be set to true. Otherwise, it will be set to false. So now that we have both of those things set, the next thing we need to do is we need to work on the viewport frame. Now, if you guys remember from a couple of episodes ago, when we created the eggs billboard GUI, we actually worked with the viewport frame in there, and we did that exact same thing. So we can actually copy the code directly from this script and put it directly into our other script. Additionally, I saw a comment on my last video which said that people were getting a red underscore when using the set primary part C frame. And the reason for this is because I think literally after I uploaded my video, they actually depreciated the set primary part C frame method and replaced it with the pivot to method. So if you guys were getting that error in the last episode, I'm sorry about that. It literally just happened as I uploaded it because you guys saw in my recording, there were no issues there. So that is really weird. All you have to do is change that method from set primary part C frame to pivot to, and it will be the exact same thing, and it'll be all good. With that all being said, what we're going to do is we're going to actually copy the generate viewport frame function, and we're going to paste that above the generate pet function inside of here. And now that we have that function inside of here, the first thing that we need to do is we need to actually get a clone of the pet model. Local pet model equals pet models, and we're going to index that with the pet.id. And then once we find that, we're going to clone it. Then we're going to call the generate viewport frame function, and we're going to pass through here the clone.holder.viewport frame, and we're also going to pass through the pet model as well. And then really the last thing is that whenever we click on the pet, which is a text button, we want to actually do something. So we're going to say clone.mouse button one click, connect. We're going to create a brand new function inside of here. And for right now, we're not going to do anything besides just print true. So we can go ahead and start up our game and see if this works. And we can see when we start up our game, we now have a pig and a cat being displayed. So we have the name of the pet displayed above it. And then we also have the viewport frame showing the pet model as well, which means that this is working out really good. If we click on the pet, we can see that true is printed out as well. So we know that that's working too. This is perfect. Now we're going to start working on the info frame that appears whenever you click on a pet. Before we do that though, what we want to do is we want to go inside of the info frame, inside of the pet, and inside of the viewport frame. We actually want to modify the background transparency to 1 because we don't want there to be any background displayed. Then what we're going to do is in between the generate viewport frame and the generate pet function, we're going to create a brand new function called display pet info. And inside of here, we're going to once again accept the pet, which is going to be a table. Now we actually need to create some variables for the info frame. So below the container frame, we're going to say local info equals frame.info. And then below that, we're going to say local pet info equals info.pet. And then that'll be good for now. So back inside of the display pet info function, inside of this info frame, we actually display the stats of the pet. So we need to get those stats. And remember earlier, we created a brand new config called pet. And inside of that config, we actually set all the stats for the specific pet and their rarity. So what we're going to do is we're going to say local pet stat equals, and we're going to use the pets config, and we're going to index this with the name of the pet, so pet.id. Then we'll index the table return when we index the pet ID with the pet.rarity, and that'll give us the stat of the pet. Then we want to get the actual instance of the pet, which is going to be inside of the pet inventory folder, which is inside of the player. So we're going to say local pet instance equals player.petInventory, and then we're going to find first child. So we're going to search through this folder, and we're going to search for a child, name that through the UUID of the pet. So now that we've created those two variables, what we then want to do is we want to modify the pet name text label. So we're going to say petinfo.petname.text equals pet.id, and we're going to also use the G sub method that we use down here, so we're just going to copy and paste that. Then we want to modify the rarity text label, so we can just copy this and we're going to replace pet name with rarity. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say pet.rarity. And now remember, when we modify the rarity, we also want to modify the color of the text based on the rarity of the pet. And we also did that for the billboard GUIs that we created before as well. So if we go back inside of our eggs folder, inside of our handler, we also have a function right here called get rarity by color. And what we can do is we can go ahead and copy that, and we'll paste that as the first function in our script as well. So then let's say pet info.rarity.text color 3 equals get rarity color, and then all we have to do is provide the pet.rarity. So now we're changing the pet name text label. We're also modifying the rarity text label and the color of that as well. And you know, as I'm looking at this, I realized that we accidentally left an extra text label in here called warning from when we actually created this. You can delete that warning text label. It does not mean anything, and we're not going to actually use it. I just completely forgot to delete it. Anyways, now that we have that deleted, the next thing we need to do is we need to actually modify the food stat and the money stat text labels inside of the stats frame. So what we're going to do is we're going to say pet info.statsframe.foodstat.text equals, and now remember, when we set this text, we want to prefix this with the food symbol and X. So we'll say equals food symbol dot X dot, and we're going to combine that with the pet stat, just like that. So then we can duplicate this, and instead of the food stat this time, we're going to modify the money stat. Instead of displaying the food emoji, we're going to display the money emoji. Now that we've done all that, we also need to set the viewport frame as well, and we're going to do this the exact same way that we did when we generate the pet. So what we're going to do is we're just going to copy and paste this directly into here, and then we just need to provide it the viewport frame. So we're going to say pet info dot viewport frame, and there we go. The next thing that we need to consider is the equip button. Whenever we click on a pet, depending on if it is equipped, we need to modify the equip button based off if the pet is already equipped or if it's not equipped. If the player has the pet equipped already, then we want to display the equip button as having a red background, and we want the text to actually say unequipped, because we obviously don't want the player to be able to equip a pet they already have equipped. And of course, on the opposite end, if the pet is currently unequipped, we want the button to be displayed as green and say equipped. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if pet instance, and we're using the pet instance because this will tell us if the pet is currently equipped, pet instance dot equipped dot value then, and like I said, we're going to say pet info.equip button.text. And if the pet is already equipped, then we want to set this text to unequipped, and we're going to set the background color 3 of the text button to color 3 dot from RGB, because that's what I prefer, and it's going to be a reddish color, so something like that. And of course, if the pet is not equipped, then what we want to do is we want to set the text to equip, and we want to set the background color instead of a red to be a green. So then what we need to do is inside of the generate pet function, inside of where we listen for the click, what we're going to do is remove this print statement. Then we're going to call the display pet info function, and we're going to pass through the pet, which is the table that is passed through to the generate pet function. And we also want to set the visibility of the pet info frame to true, so that is being displayed. And we can go ahead and start our game and test that out. So we can see both of our pets are being generated. When we click on them, we can now see that this info frame now pops up. We can see the name of the pet is cat, the rarity is common, and it's a gray color. The stats are 2.5, and we have the equip button and the delete button right here. If we click on the pig, we can see that the information changes. So the name is pig, the color is blue, the rarity is rare, the color of the rarity is blue, the stats are 6.5, we have the equip button there, and we also have the trash can as well. So this is working perfectly. Another thing that we need to do though, otherwise we're going to have a memory leak, is back inside of the display pet info function. What we need to do is every single time we call this function, what we do is we clone the model of the pet, and then we parent that to the viewport frame. So we need to delete the old pet model before we add a new one. Otherwise, we're going to have a memory leak. Now we can do this really easily. So above where we create the pet model variable, we're going to say local previous model equals pet info dot viewport frame, find first child of class, and now the class that we're going to be looking for is model. So what this is going to do is it's going to look for the viewport frame and check if any of the children inside of the viewport frame is a model, and if we are able to find one, then what we want to do is we want to destroy them. So basically every single time we call this function, we're going to see if there is a model currently existing inside of the viewport frame, and the first time that we call this, there will not be, because we of course haven't put a model in there yet. But the second time that we call this function, there will be a model inside of the viewport frame, and then that one will be destroyed, and we're basically going to replace it with a brand new one. So this will patch up a memory leak, which could cause your players to lag after a while. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to actually start organizing this code a little bit, which is actually why we cleared everything out of the handler script. So what we're going to basically do is we're going to basically move everything to inside of the handler script. So we're going to copy all of those variables, paste them directly into there, and then all of these functions that we created, we're going to paste inside of there as well. So we're going to remove them from the manager script and put them inside of the handler. And then instead of saying local function for all of them, we're going to remove the local keyword, and we're just going to say module dot at the beginning of the name. So once again, remove local and add module to all of them as well. Now, once we've done that for all of the different functions, what we then need to do is we need to update the function calls inside of here, which have a red underline to them as well. So all we have to do is paste module dot next to them, and that'll make sure that we're calling the function once again. And there we go. Now all the functions have been set back up perfectly. Then back inside of the manager, we don't actually have these two functions anymore. So now we have to say handler dot pet instance to table and handler dot generate pet that as well. And if we just go ahead and start this up, we can see that it all should work perfectly fine. Actually, one issue that we're going to have with this is because we copy and pasted all the variables from this script into here, we actually brought over the require of this specific module right here. And of course, if a module requires itself, then there will be an error. So anyway, we can start this up and see that this should work perfectly fine, and it does. So that is perfect. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go back inside of our manager, and we're going to actually start scripting the equip button, which is inside of the info pet frame. So this button right here. So let's actually create a variable for that. So we're going to say local equip button equals petinfo.equip button. Then what we can do is before this for loop and above the exit button, we're going to say equip button dot mouse button one click connect function and create a brand new function inside of here. Now back inside of the handler, we're going to actually create a brand new variable inside of here, and we're going to say module dot selected pet equals nil, because by default we don't want there to be any selected pet, but we're going to set this variable anytime that we click on a pet. So if we go back to our generate pet function, what we're going to do is we're going to set the selected pet variable to the current pet. So back inside of the manager, then what we want to do is inside of this function, we're going to say if not handler dot selected pet, then return end. So if we don't currently have a selected pet, then we're just going to not do anything. Otherwise, we're going to use a remote function, and we actually need to create this real quick. So inside of the replicated storage, inside of remotes, we're going to add a brand new remote function, and the name of this remote function is going to actually be called pet equip. So now we're going to say local result equals remotes.pet equip invoke server, and what we're going to pass through the server is the handler.selectedpet.uuid. So anytime we click on a pet, it's going to set this variable to that specific pet. And if we try to equip it, we want to tell the server, and we want to give the server the UUID of the pet that we want to equip so that the server can identify it and equip it for the player if it should equip it for the player. Now let's think about the logic for a second behind this remote function. This remote function is going to return something, and let's think about what it should return. Well, if the player is able to equip the pet, then it should return equipped. But then let's also think that the equip button doesn't only act as an equip button. And what I mean by this is that the equip button will also say unequipped sometimes as well if the player is currently equipped. So the pet equipped remote function isn't only trying to equip it, but it should also unequip it as well if the pet is currently equipped. So it should also return unequipped. And imagine if the player is not allowed to equip any more pets when they try to equip this pet. Then what we should do is we should return full so that we know that the player cannot equip any more pets. Let's start doing things on the client side that we should be doing based off those results. So first off, if there is no result because there's some type of error, all we want to do is we just want to cancel the function out right here. And that's why we're saying if no result, then return end. Then what we want to do is we want to actually find the template of that specific pet inside of our container. So we're going to create a brand new variable called pet template instance. And what we're going to do is we're going to set that to container, and inside of the container, we're going to try to find the first child, and the name of the child is going to be handler.selectedpet.uuid. Now that we found that, we're going to do things based off of the result. So we're going to say if result equals equipped, then. So if the pet has just been equipped, then what do we need to do? Back inside of the GUI, we actually need to go inside of the info, inside of the pet, and now we want to modify the equip button, because if we just equipped it, we want the equip button to now say unequipped, because if we just equip the pet, we now want the button to say unequipped, and we want the background color to be red, which if that sounds familiar, well, yeah, that's actually what we did right here when we display the pet info. So what we can actually do is we can copy this and paste that directly into here. So if the result equals equipped, we're going to set the button text to display unequipped, and we'll also change the background color as well. And another thing that we need to do is with the pet template, if we go inside of the container and inside of the template and inside of the holder, we can see that we have this equipped text label right here. We want that equipped text label to actually be displayed or visible so that the player knows that that pet is currently equipped. So what we're going to do is we're going to say pet template instance dot holder dot equipped dot visible equals true. Now where we have this else statement, we're going to actually change this to an else if statement, and we're going to say else if the result equals unequipped, then. Now we're going to do the opposite. We're going to set the equip button text to equipped. We're going to change the background color to green, and of course for this we want to set the equipped visibility inside of the pet template to false so that it's no longer displayed. And remember, we have one more possible result, so we're going to say else if result equals full. Now this could just be an else statement instead of an else if statement, but I like using else if statements so that we can remember what all the result values could possibly be. And now if we do get full, we're just going to print out full, and now that looks pretty good. Now we need to actually create more player info, because one, we need to know how many pets the player can have equipped and how many they can also have stored. So back inside of the server script surface, inside of the player data script, we're going to go down to where we just created the pet inventory folder right here, and we're going to actually create a brand new folder. So I'm just going to copy and paste that and change this from pet folder to pet info. So the name of this folder is of course going to be pet info, and inside of this folder we're going to actually create the max equipped. So we're going to say pets max equipped equals instance.new int value. We'll parent that to the pet info folder that we just created. We'll say pets max equipped dot name equals max equipped, and we will set the value of this, and we'll set the value of this to 3. So by default, the max amount of pets that the player can have equipped is 3. Then we're going to do the exact same thing, but instead of for the max equipped, this is going to be for the max stored. So instead of max equipped, we're going to say max stored. We'll change the variable for all of these, and then the name of this is of course going to be max stored, and the default value should be 50. Now the only way that this number will ever change usually is if the player purchases game passes. Considering I'm not going to be implementing the game passes for these specific features, and considering you guys have watched this entire tutorial up to this episode, you guys should most likely understand how to implement these game passes yourself, and also how to implement the data saving yourself as well. I'm not going to be saving the data because we're not implementing the game passes, so this number will never change, meaning we don't actually have to save this data. The same goes for this data as well. Anyways, now that we've created the player data for these specific things, we then want to create a brand new server script inside of the server script service, and we'll rename this to pets. Now inside of the server script, we are going to get the replicated storage, because remember, we created that pet equip remote function, and we're going to handle that inside of here. Then we're going to create a variable for remotes, and we're going to say remotes is replicated storage dot remotes. Then at the bottom of our script, we're going to say remotes dot pet equip dot on server invoke, and we're going to connect that to a brand new function. So let's create a brand new function up here. We're going to say local function pet equip, and we're going to accept the player who called this function as a player object, and we're going to accept the UUID, which is going to be a string. So then of course on the server invoke, we're going to set that to the pet equip function that we just created. Now the first thing that we're going to do inside of the pet equip function is that we're going to actually see if the player has the pet that they say that they want to equip or unequip. And the reason we're doing this is because remember, the client can always lie to us, so we need to make sure that the information that they're telling us can actually even be found. So we're going to say local pet equals player.pet inventory, because that's where all the pets are stored, find first child, and then we're going to try to find the first child with the name of the UUID passed to us. And then if we're not able to find that pet, so if not pet, then we're just going to return n so that we stop the function right there. Now if we are able to find the pet, we actually want to check if the pet is equipped. So we're going to say if pet.equipped value then. So if the pet is equipped, then we want to actually unequip the pet. So we're going to say pet.equipped.value equals false. And then we're just going to return unequipped so that we know that we did just unequip the pet. Now, if the pet is not equipped, we want to check if the player is able to equip the pet. So what we want to do is we're going to create a function up here called canEquip pet, and inside of here what we're going to do is we're going to accept the player. The way that we're going to determine if the player can equip the pet is if the amount of pets the player currently has equipped is less than the max amount of pets the player is allowed to equip. We can get the max amount of pets the player is allowed equipped easily, and we'll do this by saying local max equipped equals player.petinfo.max equipped.value, because remember, we just created this not too long ago inside of the player data script. Now that we have this, we also need to figure out how many pets the player currently has equipped. So we'll create a brand new function and we'll say amount equipped, and this will also accept a player as well. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say local equipped equals 0. So we're setting the equipped variable to 0. Then what we're going to do is we're going to loop through all the pets that are inside of the player's pet inventory. So we're going to say for underscore pet in ipairs player.pet inventory get children do. So this is going to loop through all the pets inside of the pet inventory. Then what we want to do is we want to check if that pet has the equipped value set to true. So if pet.equipped.value then, and if it is set to true, then what we want to do is we want to add 1 to the equipped variable, and then at the end we will return equipped, and this will give us the total amount of pets that the player currently has equipped. So then back inside of the canEquip pet function, we're going to say local currently equipped equals amount equipped, and we'll pass through the player. Then we'll say return currently equipped less than max equipped. So if the player currently has less pets equipped than the max amount that they're allowed to have, then this will return true, meaning that the player is allowed to equip a pet. Otherwise, say the player has 3 pets equipped and they're only allowed to have 3 equipped, then this will return false, meaning that they're not allowed to equip any more pets. And we're going to use this function back inside of the pet equip function, and we're going to say else if, and we're going to check if the player can equip a pet by saying can equip pet. We'll pass through the player, and if the player is allowed to equip the pet, we already know that this pet is not equipped, so then we're going to see if the player is allowed to equip the pet, and if the player is allowed to equip a pet, then we're going to set the equipped value to true. So pet.equipped.value equals true. Additionally, in the next episode, we'll create a pet following system, so we'll make pet follow the player here, And then also we want to return equipped because we just equipped the pet. Now, finally, we're going to say else, and this basically means that the player is unable to equip the pet. We're going to return full because the player already has the max amount of pets that they can have equipped. Now that we have this all created, we can go ahead and start our game and test this out. So when we press the equip button, we can see that the pet is actually now equipped. We can see this is displayed on the pet. We can now see that the equip button displays unequip and is red. And also if we look inside players, inside of our player, inside of the pet inventory, and if we check inside of these pets, whichever one is the cat, so this is the pig, this is the cat, the equipped should now be set to true, meaning that we now have the pet equipped. And also if we click unequip, this value should now be set to false, and we can see it is properly set to false, which means this is working perfectly. The next thing that we want to do is we want to actually create a warning which tells the player that they're unable to equip any more pets currently. The way that we're going to do this is by going into the frame, and we're just going to actually duplicate the subtitle. We'll rename this to warning, and then we are going to put this directly above the frame, make this a little bit smaller, so something like that. We'll set the text to "You cannot equip another pet!" exclamation mark, and we'll also set the color to a little bit of a darkish red as well. And then we also want there to be a stroke behind this as well, so we'll set the text stroke transparency to 0. And actually I spelled equip wrong, so you cannot equip another pet. And then we're going to set the visibility of this to false because we don't want to always see it. So then we can go back inside of the manager, and now what we're going to do is if the result equals full, then what we actually want to do is display the warning label. And let's actually create a variable for the warning. So we're going to say local warning equals frame dot warning. There we go. And if the result equals full, we're going to set warning dot visible to true so the player sees the warning. And we also want to make the warning not visible after a couple of seconds as well. So we're going to say test dot delay. We'll let it be visible for like 3 seconds. We'll say function, and then we're going to say warning dot visible equals false, so it is no longer displayed. The next thing that we want to do is we want to calculate the amount of pets that the player currently has equipped so that we can change this number directly up here. So inside of our handler, kind of towards the top, like right above the display pet info. So we're going to create a new function inside of here, which is going to be called update pets equipped, and that's not going to accept any arguments. And we're pretty much going to do the exact same thing that we did in the amounts equipped function up here. So we can actually just literally copy this, paste it directly inside of here, and then towards the end, once we figure out how many pets the player does have equipped, we're going to modify the equipped text label inside of the stats frame. And let's go ahead and create a variable for this. So right below info, we're going to create a variable for stats. So we're going to say local stats, and then we'll say local equipped stat equals stats dot equipped, and we'll also create a variable for storage as well, so storage and equipped storage. So back down to the update pets equipped function, we're going to say equipped stat dot text equals, and now let's look at how this text is currently set up. So we want to make sure that we display the pet icon, then we want to display the amount that's currently equipped dot dot, and then we want to add a slash to this, and then to the right of the slash we want to say the max amount of pets that the player can have equipped. So the way that we get this is by saying player dot pet info dot max equipped dot value, and that'll give us the max amount of pets that the player is currently allowed to equip. Now that we've created this function, we actually want to call this a couple of different times. So we want to call this when the script first starts up, so we're going to say handler dot update pets equipped. Additionally, we want to call this when we either unequip or equip a pet as well, so we can paste that directly inside of both of those. And then that's it for right now. So now that we started to update the pets equipped text label, the other thing that we also need to do is create a function for updating the storage label as well. And right above where we created the update pets equipped function, we can create another function, and this is going to be update pets stored. Now, figuring out how many pets the player currently has stored within inside of their inventory is extremely simple. So we're going to create a variable for this, and it's going to be called stored. And what we're going to do is we're going to say player dot pet inventory get children, and get children is going to return an array. And all we have to do to figure out how many objects are inside of an array is just add a hashtag to the beginning of this, and this will return the amount of children that are inside of pet inventory. So now we just have to modify the storage label, and I actually messed up the name of this variable. Instead of equipped storage, it should actually be storage stat. I don't know how I messed that up, but anyway, going back to this function, we're going to say storage stat dot text equals, and now let's see how this text label is actually set up. So we see that it is prefixed with this little box emoji right there. Then we say the amount that we currently have stored, dot dot, we add a slash between the stored, and then we need to display the max stored that the player can currently have. And we do basically the exact same thing inside of the update pets equipped function right there. So we can copy and paste this, and now instead of saying max equipped, we're going to say max stored. So now we need to think about when do we need to actually update the amount of pets that the player currently has stored inside of their inventory. Well, the first thing that I can think of is that we want to call this when the script first runs. So we basically need to update the default data inside of the GUI with the actual player data. So we're going to say update pet stored. We should also also call this whenever we delete a pet, which currently we don't have that functionality set up, but that's just an idea. And then also whenever the player obtains a new pet from hatching an egg, we also want to call this as well. And we're able to tell when a player gets a new pet because we actually have the remote event called pet hatched right here, and that's called whenever an egg is hatched by the player. So we can actually listen to whenever that remote is fired. So we can say remotes.petHatched on client event connect, and then we can just simply pass through the handler.update pet stored function right there. So now that we have that all set up, we can see that the player currently has 2 out of 50 stored pets, and then if we equip a pet, we can see that the player now has 1 out of 3 equipped, and if we equip another one, we can see 2 out of 3, and if we unequip, we can see 1 out of 3. Now we want to set up the functionality for actually deleting a pet. If we go inside of our info frame, inside of the pet, we can see that we actually have a delete button right here. So what we want to do is we want to create a variable for that delete button. So we're going to say local delete button equals pet info.delete button. Then we can listen for this to be clicked right below the equip button. So we can say delete button, mouse button 1 click, connect, and we will connect that to a brand new anonymous function. And now we're going to be doing a lot of the same stuff that we did inside of when we listened for the equip button to be clicked. So we first want to check if the handler.selectedPet is set to a pet. Then we also want to create a remote event inside of our remotes folder. So we're going to rename the remote event to pet delete. Then when we click the delete button, we're going to actually fire that remote event. So we're going to say remotes.pet delete fire server, and we're going to pass through the handler.selectedPet.uuid, very similar to when we invoke the server on the pet equipped remote function. So this is going to tell the server that we want to delete this specific pet. And then just like how when we equip the pet, we also want to get the pet template instance as well in this function. So we're going to get that. And then what we want to actually do is, since we're deleting it, we want to destroy this template, which is held inside of the container, because we obviously don't have this pet any longer. Additionally, every single time we delete a pet, we want to set the visibility of the pet info frame to false, because we no longer want that frame to be displayed. And then when we delete a pet, we also want to update the amount of pets that are currently stored within the player's inventory. And also, if the player had that pet equipped, we also need to update the amount of pets that the player currently has equipped as well. So what that means is we're just going to say handler update pet stored, and then handler update pets equipped. Now the one thing is that we can't actually call these functions directly after we get the pet deleted, because the way that these functions actually work is by going through the player's inventory. And we basically need to add a small delay to when we call both of these functions, because the client basically needs to wait a couple of milliseconds for the server to actually react to the remote that we just fired. So what we're going to do is we're going to say task.delay, and the amount of seconds that we could put in here is like literally 0.5. It doesn't have to wait much time at all. And then we'll just create an anonymous function inside of here, and then we will call both of those functions inside of this small delay. So anyway, now that we created that, let's go back inside of the pet script, inside of the server script service, and now we need to actually code the functionality for deleting a pet. So let's go ahead and create a function below the pet equip function, and we're just going to say pet delete, and this is going to accept the exact same arguments as the equip function. So it's going to accept the player and the UUID of the pet that they want to delete. And then of course we want to check if the pet exists, so we'll just do this exact same thing inside of this function. And if we are able to find the pet, then all we want to do is we want to destroy that pet. Then we'll connect the pet delete remote event to the brand new function that we just created. So remotes.petDelete.onServerEvent connect, and we'll say the pet delete function. So now let's go ahead, start up our game, and test this out. So if we click on our cat and then we click the delete button, we can see that the pet has been deleted, and we can see that the stored pets have been updated as well, and the info frame is now not visible. And we can do the same thing with the pig, and now it all works perfectly. Additionally, if you wanted to, you could go back inside of the manager and you could actually set this delay to like literally 0.01, and that delay should be long enough for the server to react to the remote firing. Now another thing that we need to think about is, what if the player has the pet inventory open on their screen and they hatch another pet? Well, when this happens, we want to add that pet that they just hatched directly to their inventory to update it. And if we remember correctly, we're already listening to the pet hatch remote event that fires whenever an egg hatches a brand new pet. The thing is though, if we go inside of the server script service and inside of the egg script, what information is actually included with this remote event? Well, this table right here is actually included whenever we fire the remote event. And the only thing that's actually inside of this table, well, we can see that inside of our replicated storage, inside of our configs, and inside of our eggs config. So this table, for example, would be included in the pet hatch remote. So we would get the ID, the rarity, and the chance. But the thing is that we need more information than just what's included here. The most important thing is that we need the UUID of the pet. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to go back inside of the server script service, inside of the utils, and inside of the rewards module. And when we reward a pet, what we actually want to do is we want to return that folder instance that we just created as well. So we can actually say local pet instance equals, and now the rewards.pet function is returning that instance to us. So then whenever we fire this remote event to the client, we can pass through the pet, and we can also pass through the pet instance as well. So then going back inside of the manager, when we listen to the pet hatch remote event on the client, what we can do is create an anonymous function, and this anonymous function is going to accept the pet, which is going to be a table, and the pet instance, which which is going to be an instance. And now what we want to do with this information is we want to generate a brand new pet and add that directly to the container. And we already done this before right up here inside of this for loop. So what we need to do is we need to convert the instance to a table, and then we just need to call our generate pet function. So we're literally going to copy the code directly from there, paste it into here, and now instead of saying pet, we actually want the pet instance, because remember, the pet table is just a basic table from the egg, which doesn't give us enough information. That's why we created the pet instance. And now that we've done that, this should work perfectly. So let's go ahead, start up our game, and see how this works. So we can see that the inventory is already open. We can see that once we hatch a pet, the pet gets added directly to our inventory, and we can keep hatching more and more pets, and we see that they keep getting added directly to our inventory, which means this is working perfectly. Now, one of the last few things that we need to script up is the multi-delete functionality, and that's this button right here. So the multi-delete functionality basically includes clicking on this button, the info frame changes to a different info frame from the normal pets one, and then what we want to do is we want to be able to select a couple of different pets, and then be able to click a button, which will then delete all of the pets that we had selected. So what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of the handler, and also I'm going to close this handler, which is actually from within inside of the eggs billboard GUI that we created the other day. So now we just have this handler and this manager opened up. Then what we're going to do is towards the top of this, we're going to create new variables. So we're going to say module.selected pets, and this is going to be a table. So we're going to use selected pets when we go into the multi-delete mode. And then also we're going to have another variable called mode, and by default, this is literally going to be set to default. And when we're non-default, the other mode is going to be called delete. So we're going to have default and delete both as modes. All right, so let's go back down to the generate pet function, which is right here. Currently, we do these three things whenever we click on a pet. But the thing is that the functionality needs to change when we click on a pet based on the mode that we're currently in. So if we're in the multi-delete mode, then what we want to do is differently than what we want to do when we're in the normal default mode every time we click on a pet. So what we're going to say is if module.mode equals default, then we want to do the stuff that we've already been doing so far. Else, now let's go back inside of our GUI, and inside of the info, we have the pets frame and the delete frame. And if we look inside of the delete frame, one thing that we're going to need to modify is the text label called selected. And if we look at the text, it says pet selected, and then the number of pets that are actually selected at the end. So let's go ahead and create a variable towards the top of our script for the delete info. So we can copy pet info and say delete info and delete. So now that we've got that frame, what we can do is we can come back down to here. At the bottom of this else statement, we can say delete info dot selected dot text equals pets selected semicolon space, and then somehow we're going to need to add a number to the end of this. Okay, so now imagine that we're in the delete mode and we want to start selecting pets, and the way that we're going to select pets is of course by clicking on the pet template. So what we're going to do is when we select the pet, we're going to say table.insert, and then the table that we're going to be using is the module.selected pets, and what we're going to insert into this table is going to be the pet table that is given to us as an argument. And then additionally, if you look back inside of the container, inside of the template, we have this delete text label right here, and anytime we select the pet that we want to delete inside of the multi-delete mode, we want to make sure that this text label is visible so that the player knows they have this pet selected for deletion. So then what we're going to do is we're going to say clone.holder.delete.visible equals true. So now this is selecting the pet, and this is displaying that the pet has been selected. And now that we've selected a pet, we can actually use this table right here to determine the amount of pets that we currently have selected. So all we have to do is we say ... so we can add on to the string, and we're going to say hashtag module.selected pets. Make sure you say selected pets, not selected pet. And of course, the hashtag before the name of the table will tell us how many objects are inside of this table. But now the other thing that we have to think about is when we click on a pet, we also want to be able to deselect them or unselect them as well. So what we should do is inside of this else statement, we should create an if statement. And what we want to do is we want to check if the pet is currently selected. So the way that we can do this is by saying table.find, and the table that we're going to look through is of course the module.selected pets, and we want to try to find the pet. So if we are able to find the pet, then we want to do something. So if the pet is not selected, then we're going to select the pet, and we're also going to display to the player that we have selected pet. And I think the most obvious thing that we're going to do is if the pet is already selected, then we of course want to set the visibility of the delete text label to false, effectively telling the player that they have unselected that pet. And then also we want to remove that selected pet from the table as well. So we're going to say table.remove. And of course, the table is going to be selected pets. And you might think that you might just be able to put pet, but when you're using table.remove, you actually need to put the position of that object inside of the table. And the way that we can do that is by using table.find. Table.find actually returns the position that it found that element inside of the array. So now that we have the functionality for selecting and unselecting a pet, and then updating the amount of pets that are currently selected, we now have to actually script when we click on the multi-delete button. So going back inside of our manager, we actually need to create a variable for the multi-delete button. And let's close a lot of the stuff in our GUI. Really, we just want the frame open. We don't need the container or the info or stats open. So now we see we have the delete button, which is actually the multi-delete button. Then we'll just create a new variable up here called multi-delete button equals frame.delete button. And now towards the bottom of our script above the exit button, we're going to say multi-delete button dot mouse button one click colon connect function. So now this button is basically going to act as swapping modes. So remember, we have the default mode, which basically allows you to click on a pet, and then in the info panel, it'll display the information about the pet. But then we have the other mode. We want to be able to click on multiple different pets, select them all, and then click a button inside of the info frame, which basically says delete. So those are the two modes that we have, and we're going to be using the multi-delete button to effectively change the mode that we currently are on. So first things first, anytime we click this button, we want to set the selected pet to nil, and we want to set the selected pets to a fresh table, effectively clearing the table that was here before. Then we want to check the mode. And if the mode is default, then we of course want to set the mode to not default. So our other mode is going to be called delete. Additionally, we want to set the pet info frame to not visible because we're now swapping from the pet info mode to the delete mode. And now what we need to do is we actually need to create a variable for this delete frame inside of the info. So going back to the top, we can see pet info. We'll just create a variable called delete info, which will be for the delete frame inside of the info frame. And then after we set the pet info frame visibility to false, we want to set the delete info frame visibility to true. And also we want to modify the selected text to 0 as well. Otherwise, it'll always display the previous number on here. So we're going to say delete info dot selected dot text equals pets selected semicolon 0. So now we're all done with that, and now we're going to say else, which effectively is saying if the handler mode is not default. So if currently we're in delete mode and we're swapping to the default mode, then what we're going to do is pretty much the opposite of everything that we do inside of here, excluding this right here. So we're going to set the handler mode from delete to default. We're going to set the pet info visible to true and the delete info visible to false. But now we need to do one more thing, and the reason for that is because remember, inside of the handler, whenever we select the pet, we set the visibility of the delete text label inside of that clone to true. And what we want to do is whenever we swap from the delete mode to the normal mode, we want to unselect all those pets and visibly show that as well. So what we need to do is we need to loop through all the pets inside of the container. So we're going to say get children do, and inside of the container, we also have a UI corner. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if not pet is a text button, then continue end. So if the child that we're looping through in the container is not a text button, then we're just going to continue end. Oh, and my apologies. It's not actually a UI corner. We're looping through this container right here, and it's going to be a UI grid layout. And the reason that we need to make this continue statement is because of this UI grid layout. So now we basically are guaranteeing that pet is going to be one of the templates inside of this container. And then we can index the template by saying pet dot, and then we need to go into the holder. So pet dot holder dot delete dot visible equals false. All right, so let's go ahead and test this out. So when we load into our game, we can see we have a couple of different pets inside of our inventory. If we click on a pet, we can see that the info frame is displayed as it should be. If we click on multi-delete, we can now see this multi-delete frame pop up. It is displayed and it says the pet selected is 0. If we click on a pet, we can see that this little icon pops up showing that we have that pet selected. We can click on a couple. We can also deselect them as well, and all of them are deselected. Now, the last thing that we really need to do is actually script this confirm button right here so that we can delete all the selected pets. And also, if we click the multi-delete button again, all of those pets will be unselected, the info frame will be displayed again, and now we're good to go. So the next thing we need to do is we need to create a variable for this confirmation, for the confirm button right here inside of the delete frame. So let's go back towards the top, and we can create a variable for this. So we can say local confirmation button equals delete info dot confirmation button, and there we go. And then right below where we listen to the multi-delete button, mouse button one click, we can do the same thing for the confirmation buttons, and then create an anonymous function just like that. All right, so whenever we click on the confirmation button, what we want to do is we want to loop through the handler.selected pets table that we created. And for each pet that we go through, we want to actually fire off the pet delete remote event. So we're going to say fire server, and what we want to pass through to the server is the pet.uuid, telling the server which specific pet we want to delete. And also similar to how we use the delete button up here, we also need to get the pet template instance, and then we're going to destroy that as well. So we're pretty much doing the exact same thing that we did up here inside of this function as well. So we're going to say pet template instance, grab that instance, and it's not going to be from the handler.selected pet.uuid. It's going to actually be the pet.uuid, exactly how we used up here. And then we're going to find that instance and we're going to destroy it. And now we're done with the for loop. The next thing we want to do is we want to set the delete info frame to not visible. So false. And then we also want to change the mode back to default. And then we also need to update the pets equipped and the pet stored, just like how we do in this delete function right here. So let's go ahead and copy and paste that directly into here, start per game, and test this out and see if it works. All right, so let's go ahead and equip the turtle pet. Let's go into multi-delete. Let's delete the turtle pet, the dog pet, pet and that dog pet as well. Click confirm, and we can see that every single thing's been updated. All the pets have been deleted. We now have 0 pets equipped, 1 pet stored out of 50. We have this dog pet. We can click on that. We can click multi-delete, undo it, everything like that. It is all working perfectly. We can also look inside of players, inside of our player, inside of the pet inventory, and see that we only have this 1 pet left as well. So every single thing is working exactly as it should be. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna be it for this episode. That's probably the longest episode that we've had so far, but I really hope that it did help you guys out. As always, if this video did help you guys out or you guys did enjoy it, make sure to smash the like button, also the subscribe button, and turn those post notifications on if you want to get notified when I upload more Roblox development content. Additionally, I have a Patreon if you guys like to support me and to gain access to all the scripts and the game file I made during this episode. There's a link down below in the description, and you guys can go and check that out. With that being said, I hope that you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.